Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Taylor Talks, featuring Taylor Dalzell. In today's episode, I will be discussing the very controversial topic of the Palestine and Israeli conflict, which is featured in the Middle East. The conflict between the Palestinian Arabs and the Zionist Jews, now Israelis, is a modern phenomenon which dates back to the end of the 18th century, before Israel was even a country. Although the two groups have different religions, Palestinians majority of Muslims and Israelis the majority of Judaism, their differences are not between their religions. Rather, their strife is caused between a grouping of land known as Israel. The reason there is fighting over the land is because Palestine believes that it should own all of Israel and Palestine. The reason they believe this is because in 1948, the UN split up Palestine into three separate groups: the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which is controlled by Palestinians, and then the State of Israel, which is a Jewish state. After the creation of Israel, the surrounding states, which included Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and Palestine, attacked the State of Israel. But to the country's surprises, the Jewish state survived. Then, in 1967, the Egyptian Prime Minister announced his plan to destroy Israel in hopes of creating an all-Palestine state. When this happened, all the Arab states sent troops to Israel's border. This became known as the Six-Day War. When this occurred, Israel had preemptive strikes on Egyptian and Syrian troops, and then which they begged Jordan's king not to join the war, but instead signed a peace treaty. Much to Israel's dismay, the Jordan king joined the war. When this happened, Israeli fighters were able to overcome Jordanian soldiers and captured the Jordan's West Bank, as well as the Sinai Peninsula, which they took from Egypt. However, Israel gave back the peninsula to Egypt in 1978 when the two signed a peace treaty together. As a result, Egypt became the first Arabic country to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Israel has also made the same offer to Palestine, offering them land back which they took. However, Palestine has refused the offer and instead has supported terrorist groups such as Hamas, which have been known to cause acts of terror and anti-Semitism since 1987. They have been known to fire rockets at Israel from Palestine in schoolyards as well as hospitals. This ongoing banter has forced Israel to retaliate by sending rockets as well as soldiers to the borders of Palestine. As a result, the death toll for Palestinians has been 8,441, of which those were soldiers or Hamas terrorist members were 8,244. The death toll for Israelis has been somewhat lower, of 1,512. Of those, 497 were Israeli soldiers, while the rest were civilians. This leads us to the question, what factors contributed to the power of Israel? There are many factors which did contribute to the power of Israel, or as some might call it, marginalization of Israel. One of them being the United Nations, for it helped Israel establish their own country when they had none. Then, after the war with the Arab countries, Israel got help from other countries, such as the United States or Canada, whether it was military aid, relief, or funds to help them keep going. Another factor which has helped Israel was that during the Six-Day War, Israel seized land from Egypt and Palestine, which has either been used for themselves or has been helped use for bargaining chips in peace negotiations. Even though Israel gained this land during the Six-Day War, many feel it was not Israel's land to take, and therefore causes many varying perspectives on this matter. The first opinion, which is the pro-Palestinian opinion, is that Israel does not have the right to be a Jewish state, because the land was taken away from the Palestinians. Therefore, Israel is in the wrong and should give back the land to Palestine. The second opinion of the two I will be speaking about is the pro-Israeli opinion. This is almost as different as night and day when compared to the Palestinian opinion. The Israeli opinion would be that they have their own given right to a Jewish state, as much as the Arabs have their own given rights to their Muslim states. They also believe that their retaliations to the other countries, as well as terrorist groups, have been appropriate responses for the anti-Semitism and threats they face. Due to the varying opinions, the media often produces several different sides to the story, which is why the media has a huge impact on the matter of the Israel conflict, for the good and bad. Depending on what the views of the media are, they either believe that Palestinian or Israel is to blame for the cause of the problems. While one news site might think that Palestine is being treated horribly by Israel, another think that Palestine should have war crimes charged against them for their actions in the matter. This is the reason why the media has a very big impact on the matter of the conflict in places such as North America. The reason for this is because this is the only way people within North America will hear about it. This leads us into our next topic, which is individual contributions. And the activist which I have chosen is Michael Pipled. Pipled was born in Jerusalem on 1961 into the home of a prominent Zionist family. His family was deeply rooted in the history of Israel. His grandfather was one of the members who signed Israel's Declaration of Independence, and Pipled's father was a soldier in the War of 1948, as well as a general during the Six-Day War in 1967. Pipled's father condemned Israel's military for seizing the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights for the war, in which he called a cynical campaign for territorial expansion. He was marginalized and shunned for his activism, and was called a two-state solution. Palestinian activist Suzanne Awula was described Pipled's father, who died in 1995, as a man that many Palestinians could not figure out whether to love or hate, and had the notable nickname of Alu Salam, which is Father of Peace. After his father died, Pipled continued into his father's footsteps and became heavily active with helping activists for peace. However, in 1997, he decided to distance himself from activism and focus more on his 6th degree black belt. However, he was soon brought back to the political realm of activism when his 13-year-old niece was killed in the suicide attack in Jerusalem. Since then, Pipled has traveled to Palestine to teach karate and engage in nonviolent activism. He has also lectured in the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK, and calls for peace for Israel and Palestine. He is also the co-founder of an organization which helps civilians who are injured as the result of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the things his organization has done is send over 1,000 wheelchairs to Palestine and Israel to help children who have been injured by the conflict. This leads us into our next segment, which is policies, strategies, or initiatives. Direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians began on July 29, 2013, following the attempt by the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to reach the goal of peace. The negotiations were supposed to last up to 9 months to reach a final status to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict by mid-2014. The talks started in Washington, D.C., and were moved to the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, and finally Palestine. The deadline was set for establishing a broad outline for the agreement by the 29th of April in 2014. However, on the expiry of the deadline, the negotiations collapsed, with the U.S. Department official statement saying that no one side was to blame for the downfall, but rather that both sides did things that were incredibly unhelpful. Due to the fact that the peace negotiations fell through, some Middle Eastern analysts think that war could be near. I will not say sure whether or not I believe this, but I will say this. Both countries' leaders should tread lightly when dealing with the other and not be afraid to compromise in order for peace. Well, that's all the time we have today, folks. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Taylor Talks. And next week, we'll be looking at the topic of the game Destiny and why this math teacher thinks it's the greatest thing since puns or suits. We'll have more in the story as it develops.